Shields up, Iron Breakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be talking about Baldur's Gate 3. I'm currently somewhere north of 50 hours of gameplay at this point, and I can tell that my review is not going to be coming out anytime soon. However, there's still a lot of people that are asking me, hey Rurikhan, what's the deal with Baldur's Gate 3? Are you enjoying it? Are you not enjoying it? Is this something that it is worth for me to get into? So I figured I'd do a video talking about my thoughts in regards to the game. Now, for those of you that are not aware what Baldur's Gate 3 is all about, they're probably going to be having the question, do I need to play Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 to understand what is happening in Baldur's Gate 3? Now, I believe that there's going to be different answers to this question depending on who you ask. Now, personally, while I have played a little bit of the original Baldur's Gate, I never really super dived deep into it. So there's going to be the people that are going to tell you, yes, you should play because you're going to get a better understanding of what the game is and all of that jazz. In my opinion, you absolutely don't have to play Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 in order to enjoy Baldur's Gate 3. But naturally, there will be references and certain characters that make an appearance that have been in previous games, and you're not going to recognize those references. If that is important for you, then you might want to check those two games out. But in my opinion, you really don't need to go ahead and do that. So just to let you guys know in regards to that. Now, what is Baldur's Gate 3? Baldur's Gate 3 is actually a CRPG, which is an interesting term. I actually had to look up on Google because I couldn't remember what exactly does the C stand for. It's computer. It is a computer role-playing game. Basically, that term exists for people to be aware that it is a more old school type of game. It is not going to be a game that is just going to be like spamming action at you willy-nilly. This is a game that has a certain tone, a certain pace. This is a game based on the tabletop game known as Dungeons & Dragons. Now, most people should be familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, but that doesn't mean that people have experience in Dungeons & Dragons. So let me try and set the stage for you. The thing about Dungeons & Dragons, at least to me, because every person is going to have their own experience with Dungeons & Dragons, and when it comes to me, the special thing about Dungeons & Dragons is just the freedom. And there's never going to be a situation where a video game can really capture the essence of Dungeons & Dragons because, you know, Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop game, and it is all about the imagination of the players that are playing. There is a rule set, which is what is applied in this game, which is the D20 system, which basically consists of like how do attack rolls function when you want to attack something. And usually, at least back when I played it, which was a long time ago, you'd roll a 20-sided die, and then depending on, you know, modifiers that you would have to strength and dexterity and the defense modifiers that your enemies would have, the type of armor they would be using, there's a calculation that is made as to whether or not you hit the enemy. And then if you roll a 20, that's a critical hit because, you know, you rolled a 20 and it's the highest number. And then you would roll another dice, which would usually be a smaller one depending on the weapon that you have. Like, for instance, a great axe would be, which is a two-handed axe, right? This would be a 12-sided die, and you'd roll that, and that would determine damage. That's kind of like the system that this game uses. It also uses that system of classes, so you have your fighters, your warlocks, your wizards, and all of these have rules. So basically, Dungeons & Dragons establishes these rules, but fundamentally what you do with them is entirely up to the imagination of each of the players, and that is what is magical to me about Dungeons & Dragons, just the freedom. Like, for instance, you can be in a situation like I've been in Dungeons & Dragons where a friend of mine said, oh, I want to smack the dwarf in the back of the head, and the dwarf would be me. And I was like, oh, you do that again, and I'm going to smack you back. And he did it, and then, you know, I was like, I want to attack him, and the DM was like, well, that counts as a surprise attack because he didn't see it coming. And then I rolled a 20 and I chopped his hand off. See, these are the type of situations that can happen in Dungeons & Dragons. And that from that moment forward, my friend could no longer use two-handed weapons. He had to use a shield. Now, naturally, the game is not going to be able to capture the magic of all of the imagination. But what Baldur's Gate does is something that is as close as you can get to that original Dungeons & Dragons experience. And it is actually absolutely phenomenal, and that is the reason why I've been so completely hooked on the game. It's pretty much the only thing that I've been streaming in the channel for the last couple of days, and they've done a fantastic job with what they've done here in terms of like dialogue choices that you get when you're talking to character, in terms of options, in terms of all of these things. Now, this is a turn-based game, And I know that you guys are going to be watching some of this gameplay here, and you're going to be thinking, oh my god, that looks so complex. That looks, because I've had people tell me this on stream, oh, it looks very complex, it looks very daunting. And it's one of those things like, look, every time that you play a new game, regardless of what type of game it is, until you master it, it is going to feel daunting, unless the game is giga basic, like, oh, you press this button to jump, this button to attack, and there's no other mechanics. If a game has any mechanics to it, it is going to be somewhat daunting whenever you haven't played it. But the thing is, as you play more and more, you're going to get the hang of it. Now, having said that, if you do not enjoy turn-based combat at all, it can be, you know, a challenging prospect to decide as to whether or not you're going to be into it. Because the thing that turn-based combat does for me is that it really lets me just take the time to see all of the actions that I can do with my characters. Like, you know, sometimes you have an action game and you'll have like 20 to 50 different combos that you can do to character. Oh, you can do like, you know, square, square, triangle, or square, 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 triangle, or triangle, triangle, square, triangle, square. You know, you have all these combos, right? And usually you'll find like one or two that work for you and you'll just do those. That's one of the advantages of turn-based, is that you can just take your time and look at all of the different options available to you at any given moment and decide what action you actually want to take. And to me, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I know that for a lot of people, turn-based doesn't work. I'm not sure if this is a game that is going to convince you otherwise, but personally, I've been having a blast with the system. Now, like I was telling you, one of the things when it comes to Dungeons & Dragons is the absolute freedom to do whatever you want. Now, that thing is never really going to be captured in a game setting, but Larian Studios has done a fantastic job at getting as close to that as possible. So I don't want to give you a specific example from the game because I don't want to spoil it for you, but each situation that happens in the game is going to have multiple ways of tackling it. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical example. Let's say you're playing an RPG and you go to a village and you are hired to kill a bunch of bandits that have been terrorizing the village, right? And then you go to this bandit camp, you locate them, you go to the bandit camp, and then you weigh out your options. So your options could potentially be, oh, I can attack the bandits head on, just charge in there, beat the crap out of them, kill them, boom, done, quest complete. And in most games, that's kind of like how that interaction would go, right? I've been hired to kill the bandits. You even get like, you'd probably get like a little quest text thing on the top right hand side that would say kill 10 bandits, and then it would even count as you had killed the bandits, right? In a game like this, it's not going to be anything like that. So you would arrive at the bandit camp, you can, you know, just charge in, kill them, be done with it, finish the quest. Or you could approach them by stealth, which is something that you sometimes see in open world games. Oh yeah, sure, I can take the stealthy approach. But then come some more interesting options, like you can reach the bandit camp and negotiate with the bandits, which can then lead you down a whole rabbit hole of things, because some of the stats in your characters will also provide you advantages if you want to try and intimidate the bandits, or if you want to try and deceive the bandits, or if you want to try and persuade the bandits, which would then give you additional options like, A, you can threaten them and force them to leave. Or you can, persuade them to work for you instead of robbing the village and convince them to do something else for you. Or you could, snitch to the bandits that the village hired you to kill them, and for them to then pay you so that you don't kill them. There's all of these different scenarios, and that is going to be the type of options that you're going to have available to you in a game like Baldur's Gate 3. And I've already been to a situation where you're supposed to, deal with something that happens very early on in the game that basically involves this massive goblin camp. And I can already tell you that I know of 2 or 3 ways to deal with that situation that don't even involve combat. And then when you actually get into combat, there's like a zillion other things that you can do depending on the classes and depending on what you're willing to do. To give you an idea, when I started facing off against these goblin leaders and whatnot that I was battling, and I was like, oh, I'm having a tough time, I basically manipulated the battlefield in a way where some of them I pushed off of cliffs and they died. Others, I blew them up with barrels. So there's, the freedom is essentially what really gets you when you're playing a video game like this. Like you might have even seen the gameplay that you were seeing there. Because I triggered a chest that had a trap it destroyed the ladder that would take me to the upper section. So I just stacked a crate on top of a box, jumped there, and then jumped to the other side. These are the types of problem solving that you're going to be able to do. This is the type of freedom that you're going to be able to engage in. Okay? But again, you have to enjoy the art style, you have to enjoy the ambient, you have to enjoy the setting of Dungeons & Dragons to really take full advantage of it. Now, like I said, I've played Dungeons & Dragons in the past. I absolutely love it. I love the system. I think it, it's not super complex for you to begin if you pick like a basic class, like say a fighter or a barbarian. It can get more complex if you go for a spellcasting class like a wizard, because they have to prepare their spells and there's all these other mechanics around it. But the game does a fairly good job of explaining to you how these mechanics work. I ended up going with a class that I would never see myself play, which is the Bard. And I've been having an absolute blast because they've done really good work with the Bard in order to ensure that you can have a ton of fun. Like I can push people off cliffs using my loot, which is cool. I can heal people. I can, keep my party up. I can buff my characters. I can debuff enemies. I can kill enemies by screaming obscenities at them. That's the kind of game that we're talking about here. And it's just a ton of fun to play, personally. Again, like I said, this is going to vary depending on whether or not you like this type of CRPGs and whatnot. If you've played Divinity Original Sin, which is another game by Larian Studios, I think this is pretty much a no-brainer recommendation. If you enjoy Divinity Original Sin 2, you're going to absolutely adore this. It's just set in kind of like a different universe. I know that some people prefer the Divinity Original Sin to the Dungeons & Dragons type of gameplay. But me, I like them both. They're both good. It's whatever. Now, one of the things that I like to do when I give my opinions on video games, I think it worked really well for a recent video that I did for Remnant, and I think I'll do the same thing here, which is basically, I want to bring up the problems straight up from the beginning so that then I can tell you all the things that I like. So, there really isn't a whole lot to report in terms of problems for this game. We're going to be getting into visuals and talking all about that. If you guys are curious, don't worry about that. But like, the only problems that I can really report is I've experienced the occasional bug, which would involve something like getting locked in turn-based mode. That has happened to me a couple of times, usually reloading the game or exiting to camp and then returning to where you were, which, by the way, there really isn't any penalty for leaving the camp and returning, so it's not really a big problem. But it is a little bit immersion breaking, like if you just did this really tough fight and then you're locked into turn-based mode, and I was like, why? What happened? So that has happened a couple of times. You can actually see that in my streams, stuff like that. There's also this one situation where I wasn't able to finish the turns. So the way that it works is you do a turn with a character, then with another character, then with another character, and you keep finishing the turns as you do them, and you just wouldn't be able to finish the turns for whatever reason. I quick saved, quick loaded, fixed it, so that wasn't a huge problem. I've had a couple of occasions where audio will start repeating, like you'll hear a loud noise or something working and the audio will keep repeating that loud noise. That has also happened a couple of times. But again, these are all very minor things, and these are pretty much all of the technical problems that I've had with the game. Now, if we go into other things where I think that the game kind of fell short, I really only have one big complaint. And that is inventory management is a bit of a nightmare, but that's because I'm a pack rat. I always have issues in games like these because this is one of those games where they let you pick up literally anything. So say, for instance, you come upon a scene where a family was having dinner and they left in a hurry. You'll be able to pick up the plates, you'll be able to pick up the food, you'll be able to pick up the knife and fork and the napkins and then you'll be able to pick up the chairs and the table and it's like when you do that stuff like that in the game, my MMO brain just kicks in and goes like, you can pick that up and sell it. You can pick that up and sell it. And it just stays like that on loop until I pick up everything and sell everything. So if you're someone like me, then you might end up having that problem every now and then. But, they do give you some tools, like you're allowed to basically send stuff over to your encampment whenever you want. There doesn't really appear to be a limit to the amount of items that you can send there. So while it is a bit of a problem, it does have kind of like a solution. The downside is that then you're still expected to eventually at some point go to your camp and like actually manage all of the trash that you've sent over. So inventory management's a little bit annoying, but that's also a problem that I personally had with Divinity Original Sin 2. But again, I don't think it's a huge deal for most people. So yeah. So now let's talk about real quick visuals and animation. I think the visuals are phenomenal. I love the art style. I think the game looks really good. There are not a lot of games that do fantasy dwarves right. And this is usually my favorite fantasy race. I love playing a dwarf. It's just really cool. And these guys get dwarves pretty cool. They do a really good job with dwarves, in my opinion. And I made my dwarf, and I'm super happy about it. The character creator is insane. Absolutely insane. The ridiculous amount of stuff that you can do. It's just tons and tons and tons of customization. And this is just me talking about dwarves. Like, there's, I don't know, friggin' 20 different races or 30 or whatever, plus God knows how many different class combinations, because there's also multi-classing, so tons of customization there. But like I was saying, we're talking about visuals. I love the art style. I think the game looks really good. I like the isometric perspective, even though sometimes it feels a little bit restrictive. Like, sometimes I'll want to look at something that's in a particular spot, and I have a really hard time getting the camera to focus on what I want to look at. But, you know, that's a bit of a limitation of the engine that is being used and whatnot. And for all the things that we're getting for it, not a big deal. In terms of performance, it's been pretty much flawless on my end. I've been playing the game at 1440p, and it's usually hanging steady above 100 FPS, except when there's a chain of explosions. If there happens to be a chain of explosions, which, as it turns out in this game, can happen quite often, whenever there's a chain of explosions, yeah, the FPS will suffer quite a bit. Like, think Minecraft when you blow up, like, I don't know, friggin' 50 cases of TNT or whatever, you're going to lose a couple of frames. It's the same thing in this game. But overall, performance pretty excellent. For reference, my hardware is a Ryzen 9 5900X with 12 cores. I have a 6900 XT GPU, and I have 32 gigs of, I think it's DDR4 RAM. But yeah, those are my, very quickly, my hardware. The game runs absolutely flawless, no issues whatsoever. In terms of animations, I think the animations are real good. Then again, it's a turn-based game, so it's a little, let's say it's a little bit easier to do the animations properly than if you're doing them in real time and make it believable. I think that the cutscenes are absolutely great. They've done a fantastic job with them, but they do have some situations where they've tried using dynamic camera angles, and I don't know if it's because of my character's, my character's a little bit challenged when it comes to his height, because he's a dwarf. And therefore, there might be some times where camera angles get a little bit wonky. Like, I had a situation where I met this other bard, and the camera just focused on a piece of wood that was in front of her, as opposed to actually showing me the character. And I was like, oh, okay. So there's that situation, but I understand why. You got to understand, like, the scope of what this game is doing. Because like that interaction, there's going to be a zillion different dialogues that you're going to be having with a zillion different characters. And they probably had some dynamic camera work there that can result in potentially, depending on, race class combinations and other factors, can kind of lead to some awkward camera angles. But those don't happen that often. I've also seen some animation transitions and cutscenes that leave a little bit to be desired. Like, for instance, there was the situation where I was just basically beating the crap out of a bunch of goblins, which, as it turns out, is something that we've done for quite a few hours in our playthrough, which, by the way, is available on the channel. If you guys are interested to see more gameplay, you can go to the live section of the channel. There's, like, again, almost 50 hours of gameplay. But so I was beating on these goblins, and then as we're about to win the battle, one of the goblins goes, no, please, don't hurt me anymore. And the person who was talking with the goblin was my barbarian, because she was about to pummel him into the dirt. So it wasn't even my character. And the barbarian had apparently a dialogue choice there, right? And so the dialogue choices were like, okay, you can try to resist your urge, because barbarians, they're, in that specific case, she's a berserker barbarian. They go berserk and she's like, oh, I gotta kill everything, right? So my barbarian is about to pummel this goblin into mush, and then the dialogue option that is there is like, try to resist the urge to kill him. Naturally, I said, no, give in to your berserking instincts and absolutely pummel this goblin into the dirt. And the transition that came from that was basically the goblin just died and the camera zoomed out, and You know, it would have been cool to see the characters go in there and just like splat, or even just like focus on these two characters like in normal combat animation and show my character dealing a killing blow. That would have been cool. Instead of that, it's just like the goblin dies, and I don't even think that my barbarian was in range to give the killing blow. And that was a little bit immersion breaking. But like I said, I'm very understanding of stuff like that because of the scope. The scope of the game is way too big to be able to focus on small, minute details like this. The amount of variety of gameplay that you can have, which we'll talk about more when we get to the gameplay section, is extensive. So I can understand why things like this happen. And this is just to tell you guys, these things do happen in the game, but I don't think it's necessarily a knock on the game because it doesn't destroy your experience. And a big component of Dungeons & Dragons at the end of the day is the player's imagination. You have to be able to come up with creative solutions to the things that you want to do. You have to be able to come up with the different scenarios that you want to execute. And, you know, the game is not going to be able to give you excellently choreographed cutscenes for every one of those situations, right? Now, talking about sounds and soundtrack, the sounds are really good. No real complaints there. Soundtrack is fantastic, which, by the way, is what you guys are hearing in the background. This is one of the more chiller tunes, but I think the soundtrack is really good. And one of the things that I like about the soundtrack is that they do that thing that I appreciate, which is they're not scared of coming to the foreground when you go into combat. And another really cool thing that I liked is I'm playing a bard, right? So my bard can play a couple of musics. It's like part of his class skill set to be able to do performances. And this doesn't really have like at least most of the time, a huge impact in gameplay, but they basically just let me bust out in music whenever I want. This includes even during combat, like it doesn't require an action or a resource that you consume in order to just play music. So a lot of the times I'll be in the middle of combat and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to bust out a tune. It's like, and they do this really cool thing where they dynamically just reduce the game soundtrack for that fight in order for the tune that my bard is playing to be heard. And it's really cool because then as you swap between characters, the audio will actually swap dynamically to indicate that the music is coming from my character. It's just a really nice detail that I really appreciate. So the soundtrack, really good. The sound mixing overall is pretty good. The voice acting is absolutely excellent. The actors really bring the performances to life with what they're doing in this game, and they've done an absolute banger of a job. However, I do have a bit of criticism in voice acting, and that is that I can tell that they weren't all recorded in the same studio. There's like different qualities, but that's a content creator thing. I'm always going to be able to tell that stuff. I think the average user might not be able to tell, but anyone who's more into audio will be able to tell. It's like, this was probably recorded in a different location, which is why, this person's voice sounds a little bit different in this situation. But at that point, you're really just nitpicking. Like I said, the voice acting is absolutely stellar. So now let's talk about the gameplay. What has the gameplay experience been like? So you're going to be basically leading a party of 4 people. One of them will be your character, and you have a number of choices that grossly increase the replayability that you have for this game in a way that I think is just absolutely fantastic. So to give you an idea, the game has these things called origin characters, which is the same thing that you would have in Divinity Original Sin 2. So say, for instance, if you don't want to play a character that you've created and you just want to play a character that the game already has, that already has a backstory to it, and it will give you unique interactions as you go through the game because there will be other characters that will be in the game that will know, your character, and you'll have the story of this character. So that already gives you a ton of different stories that you can play through with a ton of different backgrounds if that is something that you want to do, or you can make your own character. Now, personally, I love making my own character. I made a dwarf bard. It is an absolute blast. And then I am playing with the origin characters. You also don't have to play with the origin characters. You can just get hirelings, and you can eventually make your own party if that is something that you want with completely custom characters. But Personally, I find it interesting to just exist in the world as my own character and then interact with the origin characters and kind of like go around and try to help them out or not, depending on the type of character that they are, because that's one of the advantages that you have as well. You can talk to these characters, you can learn their motivations, you can learn their backstories, and so far the story that you get on each of these characters is really interesting. From the ones that I've seen so far, at least. Like, you have a cleric that has necromancy powers because of reasons I'm not going to give you. Many more reasons. You have a mage that is addicted to magic. Like, there's all of these characters are cool because they're flawed. There's no real perfect character except for Karlach. If you know her, she's perfect. Okay, she's just perfect. There's no imperfections about Karlach, all right? Forget about that. But as I was saying, like, there's no perfect character. They're all flawed in some way, which makes them much more human, and they have their own problems and agendas that you have to pay attention to. Otherwise, they can leave you. And, you know, maybe they'll return later. Maybe they'll leave you forever. Who knows? Maybe, you know, the different story threads will happen, because all of this is story threads that will happen depending on the decision that you make. You might even make a decision that some characters might not like. That might cause them to not ally with you. That might cause them to become hostile. That's the beauty of something like this, right? You're gonna have to manage your party. You're gonna have to manage the expectations. You're gonna have to see what things they want and if they align with the things that you want to do. And there's even like all of these different rules that you're expected to have depending on the class that you play. So I'm playing a bard, which means I can pretty much do whatever the hell I want. But if you're playing a paladin, then the paladins, they have oaths, and you have to, you know, play your paladin according to the oath that you take, because otherwise there are going to be consequences. And that's the beauty of it. Everything has consequences. Everything has advantages. There's a million different ways to tackle each situation. I know that eventually you start funneling down, and it's like, okay, so you can kill the bandits, throw them away, hire them, but eventually, you know, you're going to sort out the situation. The bandits are going to move on, do something else. But with this game, the reason I say there's going to be so much replayability is because there's also a different gameplay mode that is called the Dark Urge, wherein that's kind of like a different, it's this same story, but it almost feels like it's a different story, so to speak, because your character has a condition that they're dealing with that affects the backstory of your character. And you know, I've heard some things about that. I don't want to spoil people on it. So if you want to play a Dark Urge character, go for it. Do whatever you want. My first playthrough is just like regular standard custom character, and it's been an absolute blast so far. And that's just kind of like it, right? It's very hard to explain because I just keep telling you guys, oh, the freedom, you have no idea, but it really is like that. Like, I'll jump into a situation and I don't exactly know how the situation is going to play out. Like at the start of this video, if you go and watch, I'm talking to a group of ogres. When I went into that situation, I placed my party in a way that I went in there because I suspected that I was going to be able to talk to them. And as a bard, I can usually talk my way out of a lot of situations, but I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to. So before I even engaged in conversation with those ogres, I positioned my party in an optimal way to be ready to jump into action. Right? So it's like, oh, if this conversation goes sour, my mage is on the roof ready to just like fling fireballs, burn these guys into a crisp. I got my 2 melees ready to dash in, beat the crap out of these ogres, right? But that's the beauty of how you can kind of like handle these situations. It's gonna be expected that you're gonna need to have some sort of tactical awareness depending on the difficulty that you're playing. The game does have 3 difficulties. You got like I don't know if it's story mode, but it's like the super easy mode. You got balanced, which is what I'm playing. Then you got tactician, where they're probably going to buff up monsters and make it really important for you to, you know, be aware of tags going on. I want to be able to just like play a little bit more chill, so I went with balanced. And it's actually been quite challenging on a lot of situations where I've had to, you know, it feels like an adequate difficulty. It doesn't feel like the game is giga easy. I've had to really think through a lot of situations and figure out, ooh, how do I want to tackle this? And the different combat scenarios that the game even presents are just so cool. Pushing things off of cliffs. Like, you're seeing these spiders here, right? And you're seeing these cobwebs. You can burn the cobwebs. So imagine you see that blue spider over there. It's on top of a cobweb. I don't know if you can see it because my face might be in front of it. But there's a spider there on top of a cobweb. You can burn that cobweb. That spider will fall. And it will take fall damage because you burned the cobweb. And burning the cobweb is like just shoot a fire spell in there. Throw a potion. Do whatever. You can set it on fire. You can throw oil and do like a patch of oil in the ground. And you can throw fire and just like, boom. You get a firewall type of situation. There are so many ways in which these things kind of like interact with each other that it just feels really cool to explore all of the different combat scenarios. And then you have a ton of different options in terms of the class that you want to play. You can do single class, which is what I'm doing with Barbarian, or you can multi-class. You can be like a fighter warlock. I don't know if that's any good, so don't try it on my behalf. But you can be like a fighter warlock. You can be like a cleric mage. There are all of these different things. You can come up with your own backstory, the reason why you do that, and then there are feats which support different play styles. And it's just the possibilities are so insane that ever since I started playing, right, I'm playing this bard, having a blast, and I'm already thinking, dude, I want to like play a troll slayer dwarf. You guys know I only play dwarves, right? But I want to play a troll slayer dwarf, which would be like a berserker, barbarian type of character that would run around with no armor and just be, and that's something that you can do. You can make a build for that, or maybe play an Ironbreaker dwarf, which would be like a fighter dwarf, armored to the teeth with a shield and an axe or a hammer, right? And there's a ton more. There's just like all of these things in my head. And then there's like different game modes that you can do, because I've even heard of something that I wasn't even aware of, which is Explorer mode, which I believe kind of just lets you explore the whole game without necessarily following the storyline. The possibilities in my head are just like exploding. And the thing is, the game is so massive, because I've played 50 hours of the game. I haven't finished the first act. I don't know how many acts there are, but 50 hours and I haven't finished the first one. And it's like, it's just like the first map, because it's massive and it has all of these events. Like, listen, at one point, I just walked into a barn. I'm not sure if I should tell you about this one. Let's just say something very unexpected happened at a barn, and there were 2 naked creatures there. All right? It was weird. It was real weird. But it was funny as hell. I don't know. I think the game is really good, and if one thing is for sure is that 2023 has been an absolutely massive year for video games. And it's funny because in the last video that I said this, somebody said, well, maybe for consoles, it hasn't been that great for PC. Here you go. Baldur's Gate 3 is right here. Right here. I would definitely recommend this if the gameplay looks like it's fun to you. If you're still on the fence, I would recommend, check out my stream, see what's happening there. I've been streaming the game pretty much every single day, so you can jump on the stream, ask me questions about it. I'll try to answer. It's just sometimes I avoid looking at chat too often because I've been spoiled on so many things. Because like the community for this game is so passionate, they're just like, oh yeah, you can go this way and do that thing, and I was like, no, don't tell me this. Let me figure it out for myself, because that's the most fun part. But, yeah. Baldur's Gate 3 is awesome. Most of the problems that I've pointed out throughout this video I consider to be pretty much nitpicky. I've heard some more negativity from people that have been able to, move way further beyond where I am in the story. I've heard that, like, oh, there's some glitches in the second act, there's some pathing problems, which I can see. I haven't experienced those yet, so I can't really comment on it. What I have played of the game so far has been unforgettable. It's an absolute masterpiece. So, yeah, I would highly recommend if you usually like these kinds of games. If you don't, show up in my stream, ask me things. Hopefully I'll be able to tell you more there. But overall, can't recommend it enough. Fantastic game. Good job, Larian Studios. Oh, yeah, and one more thing. You want to know one of the best things about this game? It was, if you go to their website, they have an FAQ. And in that FAQ, there's a question there that just says, oh, you guys going to be selling any microtransactions? And the answer is, like, not a roundabout way. They're just like, no, we believe in delivering a finished product. Goddamn if that doesn't feel good to hear. And by the way, not even a $70 game. It's 60 bones, I think, for the basic version of the game. And you don't need the Deluxe Edition. There's nothing there other than some reference stuff to Divinity Original Sin 2, I think. So you don't even need to get the Deluxe Edition if you don't just get the basic version. Full game. I would wager hundreds upon hundreds of hours of gameplay for most people. I just can't recommend it enough. It's fantastic. It's going to be one of the best RPGs ever, unless the game just completely falls flat within the next hours that I've played, because up until now it's just been a crescendo of awesomeness. But anyway, that's going to be it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe, bell, notification icon, all that jazz. Hopefully I'll see you guys on the stream. If not, have a nice day. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.